Avatar: The Last Airbender is seen as the magnum opus of Nickelodeon animation by many. Having an obvious resurgence during the pandemic showed that even after the series is long past done, it is still held in the highest regards amongst its fans, and proving that even put up against modern cartoons, it still holds up. But can the same be said for the video games? Being a masterclass in writing cannot save one from the inevitable enemy that all had to face in the early 2000s, licensing, specifically that of the video game variety. The handling of the beloved Avatar IP was surprisingly given to a newest subsection of the Kingpin at the time, THQ. This section was based in Australia, named THQ Australia. Interestingly enough, the company had only put out 2 games prior. One, in my opinion, was a subpar game based on the Jimmy Neutron TV special Attack of the Twonkies, and the other, being a cult classic in its franchise, the iconic SpongeBob SquarePants Lights Camera Pants. It wasn't until 2006 that the Avatar saga began, where a total of 3 main series games would be produced. Now, you would expect me to say that there was a game for each book, and you'd be 66% correct. This leads me into the first game on our list, only known by Avatar: The Last Airbender. The creative liberties taken for this game are astounding, seeing as this game doesn't try to do a retelling of Book 1. Instead, it decides to have its own exclusive story that takes place between Book 1 and Book 2. So with this game, I want to first and foremost start with its story before going on to the other atrocities this game holds inside. The start of the game picks up in the Northern Water Tribe, where Katara and Aang have just convinced Pakku to become their waterbending teacher. After doing a few tasks in the tribe, they are attacked by the Fire Nation led by Zuko. Yes, Zuko, and also lead is used loosely. He just stands there and makes faces. I'm not joking, that's all he does. You defeat the Fire Nation soldiers and try to dodge fire raining down on you, but the timing makes it nigh impossible to dodge. This section ends with Katara being captured, and let me just ask you if this is how you'd react if your friend and crush was about to become a prisoner. Aang and Sokka spot Zuko's ship stopped on an earthbender island that is being used as their Fire Nation base. They then proceed to storm one of their bases to steal some disguises, to ask where the prison is, just to storm the prison. They beat the jailer, and Katara asks to free a game original character who has been captured and forced to make machines for the Fire Nation named Leanne, only to find out she had already escaped her cell. They also find a map with an earthbender training camp marked, so they make that their next stop. Once they arrive, they instantly help the training camp. The camp is being attacked by Fire Nation branded robots, and after they finish, they recruit Haru as a designated earthbender for the game. Telling the Elder about the attack, they are sent on a fetch quest to save a man from a cave. You are then tasked with fighting off some poachers, as if this training camp doesn't have any skilled fighters, having to fight Mama Bear for an old man that calls himself a sage to tell us a riddle. Aang deciphers this as needing to go to Omashu and meet Bumi. Bumi tells them what they are looking for might be in the library. We then have the council saying that they can't go because it's for Master Earthbenders only. Anyway, they decide to sneak inside anyway, and what becomes of that is they have records of benders fighting the machines. They bring this information to King Bumi, asking if he knows anything about a secret island that is mentioned. Bumi tells them that he will only help them out if they bring something from the merchant who isn't going to be operating until later. So they burn even more precious time until they are able to meet with said merchant. Oh, and wouldn't you know it, this is when the Fire Nation attacks. Haru has the others go on ahead while he thins the enemy numbers. After meeting back up with the gang, Bumi pulls out a map and shows them where the island is. He literally kept the Avatar gang in Omashu longer than needed, putting his kingdom at risk because of the Fire Nation's attack. All because of what? Yeah, the console guy is bad, as he's the one who put that information in the library, and it wasn't battles with the machines, but training. Which, don't get me started on why he would do something so stupid. They leave Omashu defending against the Fire Nation themselves, which is a idea? You spent time dealing with poachers, but when one of your greatest allies in the war are being attacked by the Fire Nation, you think, yeah, this is when I'm in a hurry. I mean, Bumi did it to himself, but still. They land on a secret island where they are sent on a fetch quest to find ancient relics to open a cave on the island. After making their way through the cave, they run into, you guessed it, Leanne, building the machines. After you don't agree to join her, she sends out one of her boss types and then leaves, threatening to destroy the statues to try and sever Aang from the Avatar's spirits. Of course, that wouldn't be enough to sever the tie, but the team continue after her anyway. But of course, before doing anything, we must help the village elder clear the machines and clean up the place a bit. Aang enters the air temple alone and clears out the bots, only to find everyone captured once he returns. He finds the fortress deep underground and is able to rescue everyone, and also tries to rescue Zuko, who is captured in Omashu. They fight her ultimate machine. It loses. Oh no, Katara gets hurt. Avatar state time. He wins. The end. Before we get into the thing in this game that destroyed me completely, let me touch on a few things. Again, since this game decided to go a unique story route, I want to talk more about Xian as a villain because I think she had a lot of potential to be really interesting. She clearly wasn't evil, all her motivation was from wanting to end the war, even if it meant harming innocents to speed up the process. I think she has a bit too much in common with the core Book 1 villains. Now, she obviously doesn't even come close to their complexity, but that's a given. She has Bender hate and rallying speeches like the Amon, and the tech and building skills used to make robots to fight Benders. Next, I want to talk about the art style. Of course, trying to copy a cartoon's 2D dimensions in a 3D game is very hard work. The animation isn't as stiff as one would think for a game of this time, and they put a lot of work into the faces. However, that can't change the fact of it looking a bit off all the time. I think it's time we actually start talking about the gameplay of, the game. This game takes a dungeon crawler RPG type approach to its gameplay, which is very different to the standard type of genre that licensed games tend to be. Most of the time spent playing is doing the fetching quest, but between those you face a variety of different enemies. Some are able to drop items, which you can equip to boost stats like a typical RPG. There are these sort of quick time events that require you to switch the character needed, just not that fun of a mechanic. Oh boy, the reason this game is going down in the ranks: the combat. This is the single, and I mean single, worst combat I have felt in a game without exaggeration. There's one, count it, one attack string. When the attack gets leveled up, it just adds an extra hit in the string. And you might as well just call this Aang the Last Airbender because that's all he's able to bend, despite the fact that he should know waterbending at this point in time. You gain XP by destroying the enemies, which leads to you unlocking special moves. Each one gets upgraded bit by bit, but that doesn't mean much. You go from doing nothing to getting a powerful attack that is able to wipe out everything in a wide area. It gets to the point where you just skip all the battles entirely. A game kind of fails as a game when you decide to skip the combat of a combat-oriented game. My final thoughts on Avatar: The Last Airbender's first game is that it's an over-ambitious, underdeveloped title that had some interesting components to it. When you have fighting that is not only not fun, but so bad that it makes you want to stop playing, causes a lot of issues. With that being said, I think it's time to finally rank this game, and I think there are 3 different ways this can be done. One is ranking it as a game, 2 is ranking it as a licensed video game, or 3 ranking it as an Avatar game. Instantly, I think the first 2 would put it in F tier. But it is an Avatar game and the first of its kind, so I'm going to rank this along with the other 2 as Avatar games and put this one as a D. Next, we are moving on to the second Avatar game, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Burning Earth. The style and gameplay of these 3 games are so dramatically different from each other that I would have no trouble believing they are done by different studios. This game also strays from the original by actually following more closely to the story of Book 2. It has some key points in the timeline that are entirely changed or missing, and I'll get to that in a minute. Since this game is basically covering Book 2, I won't go into the story specifics unless needed, so this is going to mostly be how dramatically different it is to the first game. To begin with, I want to reverse this and first talk about the combat. It closely follows that of a more typical licensed game, as there are now different attack strings that you can use, and you can gain more as you level up. You also gain a long-range attack that acts as a hard knockdown and becomes a key way of winning fights. While we are still in this opening scene, I want to talk about the art style as it has changed both for the better and for the worst. In my opinion, the models look better in this game than in the first. I think it fits more in line with the Avatar's art style. However, it is clear this game has the lowest budget and more time than the other 2, as all the animation is stiff, and there are plenty of times where they reuse animations. Instead of being a dungeon crawler like the first game, this one takes on more of a platformer, and instead of having a party of 4, you complete each mission with 2 characters. Even though the game is much shorter than the first, 4 hours compared to that one's 6, much longer if you're a dumb child, but while it's shorter, it offers more variety in its gameplay, something the first one very much lacked. Not only does it have platforming and puzzles, it also has flying missions, stealth missions, one-on-one combat, and chase scenes. Pair that with its much wider cast of characters, and I think this game is already much better than the first. The range of characters consists of Aang, Katara, Sokka, Momo, Toph, Jet, and most surprisingly, Zuko and Iroh. The interesting thing about this is you only play as Zuko and Iroh for one mission, and yet they were the most fun to play. I think they were added due to the fact that, well, one, they did do a lot in Ba Sing Se in Book 2, but also they needed firebenders in the versus mode that you can play as a nice multiplayer addition that was not present in the first game. I think the only cons of this game are the fact the animation wasn't all there. I mean, it is pretty bad, and the fact that the story's events were altered as much as they were. The ones I had the biggest gripe with is the leader of the Dai Li talking to Jet as if he already knew him, which in the show, he would. But in the game, it was never mentioned or hinted at that he had already been captured. And the fact they trusted this character at all, seeing as if you have only played the games, he comes out of nowhere, although the characters talk about being with him before. The second biggest story change gripe comes from the ending, as the final fight of the game takes place on the drill where you face both Azula and Zuko. During the fight, they constantly talk about how they can see the good in Zuko, and how he can change even though he didn't get any of his important character moments during either of the games. Overall, my final thoughts are that I think the pros outweigh the cons with this game. The variety of gameplay I think in and of itself makes up for all the bad. So when it comes to ranking this game, and especially ranking it against the first one, I would give The Burning Earth a B. Into the Inferno is the last Avatar game released, and similarly to Game 2, it more closely follows the events of Book 3. But not too closely. It is the shortest game of the three, coming in at a whopping 3 hours if you go into it blind. However, I think this game makes up for it with the fact that it has the most unique bending style of all three games. And even if it was clearly meant to excel on the Wii, controlling it with the joysticks wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. We have re-obtained the budget a bit, seeing as we have moving characters again, but we got yet another art style change. If I had to rank these games based on how well I think they fit the Avatar cartoon aesthetic, I think Burning Earth is the closest to that. If it had more animations to it, I could see it being really good. This game would come next. It does a good enough job at portraying our characters in a way that isn't unsettling like the first game. Since this game begins with Aang waking up in the ship, all the cut out content from Book 2 is just thrown into the epilogue before the game even starts. If you went into these games without having seen the show, you would be majorly confused by the story. Holy Jesus, we finally got some fun and engaging combat. I'm genuinely surprised at how well it works for this game's time period. If the new Avatar game coming out has the option to use the Switch's gyro controls to do something similar to this, that would be cool. Each character has a couple of strings, however the main thing you are going to want to use is the bending. That is controlled by hovering over an element and whipping it around at the enemies. And unlike the previous games, it actually feels like the Avatar can bend all the elements. Of all the elements to bend, water is just simply the strongest of the four. You are able to hold down a button which turns the water into ice. And using this you can freeze your enemies, and as long as they are not a boss fight character, they are one-shotted. This ice is also used often in the puzzles of the game. Now this isn't as all-encompassing of a game as 2, it is basically all combat and puzzles. However, the puzzles are much more difficult this time around, using the free move bending to make them much more interesting. But I'm sad to say this is all the pros for this game. Don't get me wrong, the bending is carrying a lot of this game on its back, but not so much that all I want to do is fight in this game, and that's basically all you are doing. I guess they took skipping enemies to heart, because unlike the first 2 games, you are now locked into fighting the enemies. This wouldn't be that big of a deal if the enemies didn't have so much health. This game's runtime is already embarrassingly low, and most of it is padded with enemies that have way too big health pools. I didn't find out about the ice trick until later into the game. If I had sooner, this game would probably be 2 hours or less. So, locked combat with enemies with too much health and a short game. The last things of the cons I want to add is the boss fights in this game are, well, the worst of the 3. Which is really, really sad because you have some of the best fights of the show happening in Book 3, but they all fall flat. Because of the bending style, the enemy's attacks are either too fast and hard for you to react, in the case of Sparky Sparky Boom Man, too slow, making the person easy to defeat in the case of Azula, we're making it literally near impossible to actually get hit with the amount of room they give you in their attacks in the case of Ozai. The fight that was the pinnacle of WTF was definitely the gondola fight. The entire thing boiled down to just running away and then attacking when they let you. But I want to come back to that Ozai fight, because really, the final fight of the show, everything has built up to this moment, and it's this. And unlike the last game, which showed the Avatar state to end basically every fight, we do not see it once in this game, not even in the final fight against Ozai. Like, the most important time Aang entered the Avatar state, and it isn't even shown. Overall, Into the Inferno was the funnest to play only because the bending was way cool to actually use. But the cons still stand. If this game had more variety in its gameplay and was a bit longer, it would probably go into a higher tier. But as it stands now, it's going to be put in B above the Burning Earth. Don't get me wrong, it is better than Burning Earth, but by just how much though? If they'd done things just a little bit differently, it could have been moved up to A, but B is where it shall stand. I find it so odd that each game is so vastly different. Everything about them, from combat to looks, make them all look like they were made by different developers. Each of these 3 games have something that would make an S-tier Avatar game. Many people ask for the dungeon crawling aspect of 1, and while this may be an opinion of mine, a more polished style of 2 would be a good look for an Avatar game, and then the bending of 3 would be the cherry on top. As of writing this, the new Avatar game hasn't come out. If it has, by the time I'm editing this, I'll flash my ranking on the screen now. Anyway, that has been my ranking of the main console Avatar games. If you were to play any of them, definitely play Into the Inferno. I'll see ya later.